shared many a class together. I was always interested in hearing his point of view on everything, so we could all argue in class. But he drove up from Columbus today to be here, and he works with the homeless, so he's got a message about the poor. Thanks, Jess.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So cheerful. Thank you all for having me, Sam. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate being here. A happy Mother's Day to all the moms here, and if you're not a mom, for whatever reason, I hope you feel just as valued on this important day. My name is Jess Peacock, as Sam said, and I work for the Columbus Coalition for the Homeless, where I serve primarily as the editor of our street paper, Street Speech, and I work in an advocacy role within the homeless community as well in Columbus. A street paper, if you're not familiar, there's several in Ohio, but they're worldwide. There's one in Toledo, there's one in Cleveland, one in Cincinnati, one in Columbus. And basically the premise of the street paper is we put out a publication. We do monthly, some organizations do twice a month, some are weekly publications. But the point of it is that we put out a publication, and it generally deals with social justice issues, but it can deal with articles and other things as well. And we bring in people who are either currently homeless or formerly homeless, and they become vendors for the paper. So they go out to the community, and they can find a street corner or in front of a shop or something, and they offer the paper to the community for, in our case, it's for a donation, that the people can donate whatever they want for the paper. Some cities have a price on it, but this city told Columbus that we have to do a donation. The vendors invest. It's not just a charity. They have to actually purchase the paper for a certain amount, and then they turn around and sell it. And through that, they make, some people make a living off of it. Some make just enough to pay some bills and to get some food, but it's an opportunity for the homeless in our community to create some sustainability for themselves. So I just want to give you a quick background of what it is I do. But I am very active within the homeless community in Columbus. So last year I was sitting for some tattoo work, surprising, I know. And the conversation turned in this setting, as it often does, because you're sitting with someone for hours on end. You know, what do I do for a living? And I explained to my tattoo artist my position as street speech editor, and he replied, oh yeah, I see them selling that on the street all the time. I never buy them though. And I said, or asked why, and he replied, they're just going to use the money for drugs and alcohol. It took me aback to hear that. And it's not something that I haven't heard before, but just to hear someone say it to me so directly. And maybe you've heard this, I mean, this is not a new statement people make. You've probably heard people say something with that regard about giving panhandlers money. And just to clarify, our people are panhandlers. They're selling a product just like a hot dog vendor, but panhandlers in general. Or maybe you even echo this sentiment. I don't know. But I for one, have heard it countless times over the last 3 years since I've worked for CCH. So it took me back. And beyond this, I'm always curious as to whose business it is what a homeless individual or someone who is in poverty does with his or her profits, their money, their own personal money. I would be more than a little alarmed if the board that governs me at my job, if they refused to pay me because they were concerned that I was going to go out and buy some beer or vodka with some of my money, which I do that. And that would be a little weird if they said, well, we're not going to pay you because you're purchasing alcohol. Or what if your boss said, you know, we're not going to pay you because we're afraid you're going to go out and buy some margarita mix or something like that. It's an odd double standard that we have put in place between people who are housed and people who aren't housed. It's interesting. And furthermore, going beyond that, just sort of a general street level attitude, there tends to be a national attitude toward the poor, toward the homeless. So much so that the UN Human Rights Committee 2 years ago denounced the United States for making homelessness a crime. And in some cities, it is illegal to feed the poor and homeless. Illegal, a crime. As in, you will be arrested if you take the step of feeding someone who is starving. So, why? why have we done this? Why has the UN said we're basically treating people subhuman? Why do we have cities that it is illegal to feed homeless people? I have a theory. I have an answer. And we sort of did not bury the lead on the board outside. You may not like my answer. You may find it offensive. You may decide to stop listening to me entirely right now. But here it is. We hate the poor and the homeless, and we've declared war on them. So I guess the question is, why? Why do we as a nation hate the poor? And it's interesting because when you talk to people individually, one-on-one, sometimes you might get answers like my tattoo artist said, like they're just going to use it for drugs and alcohol. But oftentimes you talk to someone who's like, oh, it's so sad that we have the poor and homeless. But then when we address it on a larger level, whether it be a city or a state or as a nation, our policies show that we have a strict disdain for people who are poor and homeless. And I know that sounds extreme, and it probably stands in stark contrast to everything that we think our country embodies. Justice and mercy. I mean, come on, right? I mean, this is America. We freed the slaves. After enslaving them, of course. We skip over that part, but, still, yay us. And we took the bold step of allowing, of all people, women to vote. I know, right? I mean, we're so kind and nice. Hatred isn't in our DNA, we say. But as I just mentioned a second ago, the UN Human Rights Committee denounced the United States for making homelessness a crime. And it went so far as to label what we do as a country to our homeless cruel, inhuman, and degrading. And they also pointed out that said treatment of homeless individuals violates numerous human rights treaties. The head of this committee, his name is Nigel Rodley, he said, quote, that's such a British name, right? Nigel Rodley. Nigel Rodley. Quote, I'm just simply baffled by the idea that people can be without shelter in a country and then be treated as criminals for being without that shelter. The idea of criminalizing people who don't have shelter is something that I think many of my colleagues might find as difficult as I do to even comprehend, unquote. Countless cities within the United States, Miami, Tampa, Palo Alto, Columbus is starting to take a turn toward this. They have passed the laws making it a crime to be homeless. Other ordinances target the homeless in cities and communities all around the nation as individuals are arrested for sleeping or even sitting for too long in a public space. Now, I don't know what the defining criteria is for sitting too long, but rest assured, this country is not going to stand for loitering. And also, it also kind of depends on what you're wearing. I mean, if you don't look homeless and you're sitting out in the park and enjoying a sandwich, chances are you're probably not going to get accosted by the police for sitting and enjoying a sunny day in the park. But have some raggedy clothes on, maybe be of a certain minority, and boom, you're loitering. And these are distinctions that we're starting to draw with in many cities within our country. Fort Lauderdale is attempting to pass legislation giving the police the ability to confiscate homeless people's private belongings as long as they're on public property. Without warrant, without any due process, if it's on public property, their personal belongings are eligible to be taken. So ultimately, it seems that we are less concerned with the growing issue of homelessness itself and more concerned with punishing those who find themselves homeless in the first place. It's sort of like attacking symptoms versus attacking a virus or a cold. So beyond our disdain for homelessness, we are also eager to dismantle any programs that might help people in poverty or homelessness. Again, going after the symptoms and not trying to figure out the cure. For generations, we've had programs, social safety nets in our country that have helped people, whether it be SNAP benefits, unemployment benefits, even Social Security to some extent. Social Security was created because we had an elderly population that was starving to death. And Social Security was created to help that community survive. And efforts to dismantle this social safety net are being introduced at all levels of government under, you might have heard this word a lot over the last couple of years, austerity. It sounds so official and cool, like we're austere. But basically what it is, it's just cutting stuff. It's just cutting stuff that helps the public is what austerity is. And while the economic recession has made nearly 50 million Americans eligible for food stamps for SNAP benefits, safety net programs such as unemployment and SNAP benefits are being ripped out from underneath struggling families and individuals at every opportunity. 2 years ago, President Obama signed a farm bill which effectively cut $8.7 billion in food stamp benefits over the next 10 years. And it was filled with corporate subsidies. Now, you might have heard that word, corporate subsidies. What corporate subsidies means, put it another way, is corporate welfare. It's corporate SNAP benefits. All it is giving money to companies so they can keep going. And every year, taxpayers subsidize, there's that word again, Wall Street banks. Wall Street, those people that almost like basically destroyed our country. Wall Street banks get from us, from the taxpayers, every year for free, for not doing anything, $83 billion. That's subsidies. And big oil receives nearly the same amount. It's $80 billion every year. And yet somehow the conversation always seems to revolve around those freeloading homeless people who are taking so much money from the economy, to survive and stuff. Now, we've all heard the anecdotal evidence thrown out by those who think the welfare state is breaking America's bank, despite the fact that we're handing out hundreds of billions of dollars in corporate welfare every year. And we all know someone who knows someone who is receiving food stamps, but man, how can they afford that iPhone? In reality, less than 2% of people on welfare in the United States commit fraud. Compare that to, those 2% that commit fraud, we're talking maybe as far as dollars and cents. I mean, we're talking maybe maximum $1 million in fraud, maybe a little bit more. Compare that to the fraud that was placed upon this country over the last decade with trillions of dollars in war, Wall Street situation that almost bankrupted the entire country, and yet it's the poor that are destroying us. It's the poor that we're worried about. The myth of the Reagan's welfare queen, the Cadillac driving welfare queen who defrauds the system, it still lingers. It's still a part of our cultural consciousness, and yet there is zero proof of it. It doesn't exist. So with all this homelessness, with all this poverty that we have in this country, with such lopsided systematic oppression, for some reason we are bound as a country and determined to punish those who have the audacity to be homeless. Over half the states in the Union have introduced various forms of legislation with varying degrees of successful passage that would seek to require welfare recipients to undergo drug testing in order to receive benefits. Now, in our common sense kind of world, that almost sounds like, oh yeah, that sounds like a wise thing. But then when you stretch it out and say, okay, well, the corporations that are receiving welfare benefits, are all those people getting drug tested as well? No. But we want to do it to this group of people. And the stated rationale being that such measures would effectively curb the rampant welfare fraud that is going on in our country. Various studies and concrete examples, such as Florida's drug testing program, though, show that a small percentage of individuals failed their tests, 2% in Florida. Out of all the Floridian welfare recipients that were tested for drugs and alcohol, less than 2% failed their tests. And B, ultimately, it saved taxpayers very little money. Virginia's program cost $1.5 million and saved just a little over $200,000. So you're spending $1.5 million to save $200,000. So if rampant fraud is actually little to non-existent, and the savings are minimal to the taxpayer, why do we continue such programs? The answer does indeed seem to be that we hate our poor. Politicians in our country have referred to the poor as stray animals that continually breed, as dysfunctional, as deserving of death. And radio host Rush Limbaugh, who himself is, by his own admission, was a welfare recipient for many years, has stated that people on welfare, quote, buy Twinkies, Milk Duds, potato chips, 6 packs of Bud, then head home to watch the NFL on one of 2 color TVs and turn off their cell phones, and that's poverty in the U.S., unquote. Of course, Rush fails to mention that you can't purchase alcohol with food stamps, but what are facts when you have a nation to divide? The simple question has to be asked, why do we hate the poor? One theory connects our disdain for the poor with, you've probably heard this before, the Protestant work ethic. It's dyed into the wool of American culture. I mean, at its outset, U.S. capitalism found an ideological partner in John Calvin's theology of predestination. Have you talked about that at all? The whole predestination thing? Come on, Sam, get on.
And you got a new topic, Sam.
There you go, yeah.
That'll be exciting.
But it led to a philosophy of existence that clung to the notion that if one works hard, then they will be successful, or at least be able to put food on the table. If one were poor or homeless, it was a result of something that they had done to cause it. Or they simply were not working hard enough to earn God's favor. Or even worse, God didn't favor these people because of some unresolved sin in their life. So if you weren't prosperous, it was on you or some sort of sin that you've had in your life. And that, I'm sure you've heard the term sins of our fathers. That's connected to that. If there's sin in your family, somehow God does not see you worthy as being prosperous. The Protestant work ethic also guaranteed that no matter what economic position you found yourself in, you could always choose to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. I mean, this belief is still deeply embedded in Western, quote-unquote, common sense, despite the reality and the harrowing truth that so many in our country, around the world, but let's stick to our country, we simply do not have the resources to eat, let alone thrive. As Martin Luther King said during his Poor People's Campaign in 1968, quote, "It's all right to tell a man to lift himself up by his bootstraps, but it is a cruel jest to say to a bootless man that he ought to lift himself up by his own bootstraps," unquote. There's also a strongly held belief that the United States is a meritocracy, where your level of success is limited only by how hard you are willing to work. Both of these concepts are still blindly spouted by politicians on both sides of the ideological aisle, despite the overwhelming evidence that there are three unemployed individuals for every available job opening in our country, or that those employed in full-time minimum wage jobs simply do not make enough to survive individually, let alone support a family. You've heard the term the working poor. That's what that is. The people that I know in Columbus, the people that are homeless, the people that are living in poverty, most of them are employed. They're employed. It's just they don't make enough to survive or even pay rent. That's a scary thing. When you're told just get a job, most of our people can say, I have one, but I still am homeless. And nobody has the time to climb the ladder to success when you're working 3 jobs to feed your family or pay your rent. And then, of course, there's the problem of the rigged system, the illusion of economic betterment for the poor. Now, we're in the presidential primaries right now and leading to our presidential election, and we're hearing, especially on the Democrat side, we're hearing a lot about the rigged system. Not just the rigged political system, but the rigged economic system. That once you're under, it's very difficult to get above. And some would argue that it's like that by design. Chris Hayes, who is, I don't know if he's on MSNBC, he has a show on MSNBC, but he wrote a book called Twilight of the Elites, America After Meritocracy. And he has a very interesting quote in the book. And he says, quote, "Those who climb up the ladder of success will always find a way to pull it up after them, or to selectively lower it down to allow their friends, allies, and kin to scramble up, unquote. See, we like to think that if you just work hard, you're going to get up, but the problem is that you go for that ladder, and that ladder gets pulled, and the ladder gets pulled, and you keep reaching, you can't reach it. From whether it's jobs, or whether it's education, the cost of education in this country is so far out of most people's reach at this point. And even if you manage to get into school, you're immediately in debt up to your eyeballs because of the cost of school. And once that ladder is pulled up and the right people are in power, backed more and more by unlimited sums of money from increasingly shadow corporations, institutions that were once designed to reward hard work, effort, and a bootstrap ethic become increasingly privatized and gamed to privilege the elite. In other words, the system is rigged. All that talk is true. The powerful have ensconced themselves in wombs of elitism. I like that word, wombs of elitism, and control, while those left behind become grist for the capitalistic mill. See, our system, our country's system of capitalism is designed in a way that we need the poor. The poor have to be there for capitalism to work. There is no such thing as everyone getting rich. The rich only get rich on the backs of the poor because they're doing the work. And that's how it's set up. There are no longer any bootstraps by which the poor can tug. There's a think tank called Demos, and they released a study showing that it would cost, annually, it would cost $175 billion to eliminate poverty in America. $175 billion. And that sounds like a large number, and it is. It's $175 billion. That's a lot of money. But when you consider that our defense budget, just our defense budget, is northward of $700 billion annually. $700 billion. And our defense budget is bigger than the next 6 countries combined. That's how big our defense budget is. Priorities, right? And it definitely brings the issue of American poverty into focus and puts our increasing efforts to demonize the poor into perspective. The shocking fact is that if you took the amount of what I mentioned corporate welfare was, about $160, $170 billion a year, you would easily cover the cost of most of the price tag annually it would need to eliminate poverty in America. So you take that money back from Wall Street that we're giving them without any strings, you take that money back from the oil companies that we're giving them without any strings, and you apply that to poverty programs, we eliminate poverty in this country. That's not saying everyone's going to be rich. It's just saying we eliminate poverty. So what's stopping us? If we can do that, what's stopping us? Eradicating or dramatically cutting poverty is not the deeply complicated, intractable problem people make it out to be. That's not to say it's easy, but we know how to do it. We know what we need to do to end poverty. The dollars we are talking about are minuscule compared to the size of our overall economy. Here's why we have poverty. This is how uncomplicated it is. We have poverty because we choose to have poverty. We choose to design our distributive institutions in ways that generate poverty when we could design them to do the opposite. Poverty's continued existence is totally indefensible, and it is our country's biggest shame. Unfortunately, none of us possess the individual power to alter the structures of how things work, of our economy, of our distributive institutions. Nor can any of us as individuals shatter what has become our plutocratic and corporate-controlled government. However, there's things that all of us here can do. And the more of us that begin doing these things, possibly, maybe, we can see a turn in the tide and change begin to happen. We can advocate for the homeless, meaning just we speak out on the behalf of the homeless. When we hear people say things like, well, they're just going to use it for drugs or alcohol or anything, we can speak out and talk to people who believe that way. That's advocating for the homeless. We can support institutions working for the betterment of those in poverty. In Columbus, we have several organizations. CCH is just one of them, but we have other groups working for medical care for homeless people and jobs programs for homeless people. We can speak, and let me tell you, we're always broke. So, you know, I mean, our organizations are almost as broke as the people we work with. But having said that, you know, we're there for them, and we're always looking for support. And we can speak out when we hear those tired tropes and the vilification of the poor and the homeless. For communities of faith, homelessness and poverty are, or they at least should be, one of the focus points of their thoughts and actions. Jesus and the Buddha were both homeless at various points in their narratives. In Jesus, we are privy to teachings that center around the importance of the least of these. And Jesus also, by example, spoke truth to power to the rich and powerful. The rich young ruler, you know that story? He's like, if you want to follow me, sell all your stuff. Calls them out on their excess and overabundance. In Buddhism, there is the tradition of the righteous king who looks after the impoverished. And with Islam, Muhammad called the people to turn away from pagan traditions of disregarding and ignoring the poor and spend their wealth on alleviating poverty. Not some of their wealth. Muhammad advocated for all your wealth should go to poverty. Now, we as a people like to think that America is fair and just. And if we're knocked down, well, this country provides you every opportunity to get back up. Unfortunately, that is simply not the case for many, if not most, people living in poverty. And of course, you always get that one story, you know, that story that people like to, you know, this person came from this bad neighborhood and they got to school and now so now anyone can do it. And that's, you know, unfortunately not the case. You know, there are success stories, and the powers that be like to take those success stories and say, see, it's not on us. You can do it. And, you know, sometimes when you dig into some of those success stories, you see that there was a lot more help going on there than we're told in the first place. And that's great. I'm not knocking that. Don't get my attitude on that wrong. But it's not what everyone, it's not the opportunity everyone has. I saw this great meme on Facebook that showed just a upper middle class house, white picket fence, you know, nice looking house, and then a house from the inner city, really torn down, and it's like 2 houses, same opportunity, question mark. And the answer is no. We don't have the same opportunities in this country. And the poor have to face even more problems. We have a labyrinthian housing bureaucracy with, there's always a waiting list in Columbus for not just shelter, but for housing. If you have an ex-offender status, you're probably screwed. Once you get out of prison, they're trying to get an apartment, trying to get a job as an ex-offender is extremely difficult. So you're either going to end up homeless or probably one of many in the recidivism rate, committing the crime just to get back into prison, because at least there you get meals, you get shelter, etc. Medical issues. We work with many people who can't work a traditional job, quote unquote, because of various physical liabilities or even mental liabilities. The need for childcare. Childcare is a huge issue in this country we simply don't talk about. The cost is astronomical, and in some cases people are just working to have their kids in childcare because of how much it costs. Massive shelter wait lists, I mentioned. Personal biases held by a potential employer. This is something we don't discuss a lot also in this country. You know, people who are hiring someone, if they don't like the look of somebody, if they maybe stink a little bit because they are homeless and don't have access to a shower, that's going to work against them in getting a job. Lack of resources for clothing and personal hygiene products, or even, and here's something we don't think about a lot, just a place to go to the bathroom. In Columbus, there are no public restrooms downtown. There's a reason for that, because they don't want the homeless downtown. They do everything they can to push the homeless out, and one of those is public bathrooms. You either have to be buying something in a store to use the restroom, or in one public building, you can use the bathroom, but it's like this really maze kind of involved process of trying to find the bathroom, and most people don't even, you know, give it a whirl. So just something as simple as just being able to go to the bathroom is something we don't think about for the poor and homeless. All of these factors snowball into insurmountable systematic walls that prevent many individuals from finding traditional employment and pulling themselves out of homelessness. So I'm just going to close here. I think I've rambled on long enough, but it's up to us. It's, you know, we can hope the government will do something. We'll hope that other organizations will do something, but ultimately it's up to us. It's up to you and I to change that through a lot of things, through our vote, through our charitable giving, through volunteerism, through activism. And the old quote that's attributed to Kennedy, but Kennedy grabbed it from somewhere else, is simply, if not us, who? If not now, when? And I'll stop there. And if anyone has any questions or anything, I told Sam that I'd be happy to do a Q&A about poverty, homelessness, tattoos, you know, whatever. But, does anyone have any questions about anything? Yeah.
Can we get the newspaper online? Like subscribe?
No. One of the reasons that we don't do that, and this is something that the board has discussed, and we've sort of gone round and round about. The main reason that we don't provide it online is because it's designed for the individual vendor, the person who is homeless or formerly homeless, to make their money off of it. If we start doing subscriptions, we're going to have money coming in, but then, okay, how do we divvy that up?
Right.
You know, and because some vendors put in 40 hours a week, some will put in 20 hours a week. And so it would just become a complicated process of how do we distribute that money. So we leave it as, you got to be downtown area to get the paper from someone. And that money is for them specifically.
It might be something to discuss, because I think if there's a viewpoint that more people would be interested in is an advocacy viewpoint. I mean, it could go national.
Yeah,
really easily.
Well, it is something that is in constant conversation with the board. It's been I've been there 3 years now, and it's been a back and forth thing. Like the board's reasoning is, well, if we do subscriptions, they're not thinking money going to vendors. They're thinking, well, I can go to our operational costs.
Right, right.
That concerns me, because I want that money going to the vendors directly. But it is a conversation that is ongoing.
Yeah, I'm like 1,000% interested in what you guys have to say, and I kick in $10 a month to read it.
You know, drop me an email at the website is columbushomeless.org. Because for people living out, you know, who don't come to town, obviously that'd be. I mean, we'd be happy to, you know, send people papers who want those. But you know, for people in Columbus, we try to keep it there. But yeah, drop me an email, and if it's something that you'd like to get, I'd be happy to send you a copy every month.
Okay,
for sure. Yeah. Yes.
We go down to COSI and like the conservatory down there.
Yeah.
Like, where would we find somebody to get one of those?
Generally, street speech vendors stick like right downtown, and you know where the Short North is?
No. I know where COSI and the conservatory are.
High Street and Broad are the two main arteries, and High Street and Broad cross over.
Okay.
Vendors, and that crossover point is downtown. Vendors tend to congregate in that area, and if you go a little bit further north on High Street, you go into an area called the Short North, and we tend to have a lot of vendors there as well. The one thing is that there's no set schedule. We don't require them to work a certain time. They can make their own hours. So it's a matter of just finding them. Yeah, and they tend to, like, they're smart. They'll be down there as people are going to work, people coming out of work, lunch hour, dinner hour. You'll see it, and then sometimes in between, it's like I'll go biking down just to because I want to see people, and I'll be like, where is everyone? You know, it's like if you go in between those in between hours. But if you go at the rush hour too, you can't really talk to them because they're working and they have a lot of people. So, but it's just a matter of timing.
And then you said it's once a month, so when would be like the best time to?
Well, the paper comes out the first Friday of every month.
Okay.
And that first weekend is always big because, you know, not only is it a fresh paper, but we have a gallery hop the first Saturday of every month, which is the big art thing down there. So we get, Short North downtown is swamped first Saturdays of the month, so a lot of vendors are out and everything. So that's a good time. The first weekend is always a good time.
We usually try to go during the week because it's less busy.
I understand. They're still out there during the week.
Okay.
It's honestly, it's just because we get calls all the time. Where can I find a vendor? And we're like, start walking. I mean, you're probably going to bump into one because we don't keep tabs.
Right.
It's for them to go out there and find their spot and figure it out. You know, how they're going to make it work for themselves. We keep tabs in the sense that if we get a phone call that's a complaint from someone on the street or a vendor, we'll talk to them, we'll sit them down. I mean, it's not a free-for-all.
Right.
You know, they're just not out there doing whatever they want. We do have, because we're licensed by the city, and if the city wanted to, they could yank our license. So, I mean, we stay on top of things, but we're also not babysitting them either. They're adults, they're working their job, and if there's problems come up, we deal with those problems on an individual basis.
Now, see, one of the problems that we have is we used to make up sack lunches and take them to people panhandling, and we had people just throw them, and it was very discouraging because I'm trying to teach them, you know, and then people would be so mad and just throw them. Like one guy threw it back at us.
Yeah.
And it's like you're asking for help, you're asking for food, and we're giving that to you, and you're throwing it back at us.
Yeah, I mean, this is, you know, something I talk about a lot with groups in the Columbus area is, you know, if you go to community, each community sort of has its own little culture. Each community has its own little unspoken rules, that kind of thing. Well, when you're dealing with the homeless community, and I'm not saying it's all, you know, roses and candy, it can be rough. And you're dealing with people who have been so radically marginalized to the point of being invisible that their expectations and our expectations can be radically different. So when you have a group that what they need most is cash, and they may get a sandwich instead. From our perspective, and I get it, I mean, we're trying to help.
Right.
You know, but it's that expectation results kind of thing. And I'm not justifying it by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a totally different environment and culture that you're dealing with when you're living on the land or living on the street your whole life.
And that's what I tried to tell them. I was like, look, I'm a poor single mom.
Yeah.
I don't have cash, but I get food stamps, and so I'm willing to help.
Yeah.
Like,
No, I get it.
meals and you know, and like that. It hurts sometimes.
Yes, it does. I mean, we deal with people all the time that we're trying to help. I mean, in our minds, we're trying to help, and because we're not necessarily helping in the way that they wanted help, I mean, I get threatened all the time. You know, I mean, it's just one of those things that you accept with your job. I've had someone threaten to shoot me in the face. I've been threatened to have someone beat me up because they didn't like what I was telling them. It's just what you deal with. But at the same time, I've been threatened by people who are housed and have money because I'm enabling what they see as glorified panhandling.
Mm-hmm.
I've literally had people threaten me because of that.
Right.
So, you know, expectations and results are on both ends of the spectrum. We get it from people who, I mean, we've received countless phone calls into our office, people just totally ticked off at our program. And they yell and they scream, and I'm just like, so what is your issue? I just don't want to see them out there. And they're angry about that. So it's just one of those things where, pardon my language, damned if you do, damned if you don't, for us in our position.
Right.
But it's like, these are the people that need our help, and we're going to do what we can, even if sometimes they're not always happy about what we're doing for them. I know that's not any consolation or anything like that, but it's just, if this is something that you feel strongly about, and I'm sure though that I'm sure you've gotten thanks as well. I mean, so there's going to be plenty of people that are thankful for that.
Right.
As well.
We have,
Yeah.
and that's encouraging, but especially with the little kids, it's real hard.
I get it. Yep.
Because they're both scouts, and I want them to learn that as kids, so that they just continue that.
Sometimes being good hurts. I mean, that's a lesson that we all learn, that sometimes being generous hurts.
Most of the time.
Yeah, exactly.
90%.
Yeah. Any other questions?
In your opinion, we're from a little town, Ashland, which...
I'm from Ashland.
Oh, are you?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Got my undergrad at AU.
Oh,
Okay.
Around the corner from us.
Yeah, I went to Mapleton High School.
All right.
Okay.
Yep.
So, like here, because I own a salon and we try to do stuff every year.
Bye-bye.
And-
Oh, that. Sorry for droning on.
Right, do you, in your opinion, what's the
Do you?
best way to get things to the people who need it so that it's not going through people who are sucking their portion in and then getting
Sure.
this little bit out?
Are you talking about resources or money? Because those are two very different strategies.
Both?
When it comes to money, it's research organizations and organizations that have low overhead. That tends to, I mean, with organizations like that, the money tends to get used the most. They use every part. Like with our organization, I'm the only full-time person at our organization. There's another part-time person, we have a volunteer, and then we have an operating board. The money that comes in, pretty much just, we use all the buffalo. It tends to go to the job that we do. We have an organization in Columbus called the Community Shelter Board, which their director makes $250,000 a year. It's a homeless organization.
Yeah.
Their director makes $250,000 a year. We don't have the best relationship with them for obvious reasons.
That's what I mean. I was like, I'd rather give money to where it's going more towards the
Yeah, I would say, yeah.
not the symptoms.
I would say research the organizations, just look at their overhead and everything like that. I mean, and if it's a public organization, they have to have their information available online. If it seems like it's a high overhead organization, churches that have groups that reach out to the homeless, those are great organizations to support because it's boots on the ground. They're out there and they're doing that. They tend to use the money to buy the supplies, to make the bags and everything. There's also advocacy organizations. They don't necessarily supply stuff. But what they do is, and we partially do this, but we're so understaffed it's hard to do, but what advocacy organizations do is they go to the power brokers and they work for change. They're not necessarily putting money in homeless people's pockets or anything like that, but they're trying to change the overall structure so we don't have homelessness anymore. So advocacy organizations are a great resource as well. And it's just people who know politics, who are out there trying to change laws or stop laws that are trying to criminalize homeless people. So I'll just say research. That's the main thing. And then ultimately give to who you feel that you should give to.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? All right, thanks guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jess.
Thank you, Sam.
Good to get you before he goes off to work on his PhD at Chicago Theological School this fall.